In 1925, a single con man printed more money than the entire country of Portugal had in circulation, and he nearly brought down a nation without firing a single shot. The wildest part, the banknotes he used weren't even counterfeits. They were real, printed by the same company that made the official currency. This is the story of Arthur Virgílio Alves Reis, and it might be the craziest heist you've never heard of. Reis was born on September 8, 1896, in Lisbon, Portugal. He wasn't some criminal mastermind from the start. He was a young man with big ambitions and absolutely no patience for earning things honestly. By 1922, at just 26 years old, he was already running SKMs. His first major scheme involved forged checks and embezzlement to grab control of a railway company in Portuguese Angola, which was a Portuguese colony at the time. This was called the Ambacar affair, and it put him on the radar of authorities. In July 1924, police arrested him in Porto. But here's the thing, he got out by late August 1924, released on a technicality. And instead of learning his lesson, Reis came up with something far bigger. Now you need to understand what Portugal looked like during this period. The country was running under its first republic, which lasted from 1910 to 1926, and it was a mess. Governments changed constantly. Inflation was climbing. The country was drowning in debt. Public trust in institutions was already cracking. Reis saw that instability not as a problem, but as an opportunity. Here's where the plan gets absolutely wild. Reis didn't try to print fake money in some basement with a hand press. He went straight to the source. He and his associates, a group that included a man named Karl Marang, a Portuguese diplomat named José Bandeira, and a German businessman named Adolf Hennies, forged official documents from the Bank of Portugal. These forged papers authorized a legitimate British printing company called Waterloo and Sons, based in London, to print banknotes for Portugal. On December 4, 1924, Marang walked into the offices of Waterloo and Sons carrying what looked like a perfectly legitimate contract. The documents even bore forged signatures of real Bank of Portugal officials, including the governor, Inocencio Camacho Rodrigues, and Waterloo and Sons fell for it. Think about this for a second. The printer didn't make counterfeit money. They used the authentic plates. The same paper, the same ink, the same design as every other real Portuguese banknote. These weren't forgeries in any traditional sense. They were genuine quality notes printed under false pretenses. That made them nearly impossible to tell, apart from legitimate currency. By the time the presses stopped, Waterloo and Sons had printed 200,000 banknotes. Each one was a 500 escudo note. The total face value came to 100 million escudos, which was roughly 0.88% of Portugal's entire GDP at the time. One man and his small crew had just created close to 1% of an entire nation's economy out of thin air. By June 1925, Reis set up a front bank called the Banco de Angola e Metrópole to launder and circulate the money. And he didn't just sit on the cash. He went on a spending spree that would make a lottery winner blush. He bought luxury real estate. He bought hotels, farms, jewelry, art, and even an entire fleet of taxis. But Reis had an even bolder goal. He was trying to buy a controlling stake in the Bank of Portugal itself. To take over the central bank, he needed around 45,000 shares. By late 1925, he and his associates had allegedly accumulated about 10,000 shares. He was literally trying to use fake money to buy the institution that controlled all the real money. Reis later claimed his real goal was to develop Portuguese Angola economically. He argued that the money he injected actually created a temporary boom. Critics saw that defense for what it was, though. Self-serving nonsense designed to paint a con artist as a patriot. The unraveling started with a newspaper. On November 23, 1925, the Portuguese paper O Século began asking uncomfortable questions about the suspiciously opaque activities of Banco de Angola e Metrópole. Journalists noticed something strange. Duplicate serial numbers. Some of the 500 escudo notes flowing through the economy had the same serial numbers as notes already in circulation. That was the thread that pulled the whole thing apart. On December 5, 1925, O Século publicly exposed the fraud. The next day, December 6th, Reis was arrested aboard a ship returning from Angola. Most of his associates were also picked up, though Hennies managed to flee. Now, most people assume the fraud was the whole disaster, but the real damage came after. The Bank of Portugal ordered every single 500 escudo note withdrawn from circulation starting December 6th. Over the next 20 days, by December 26th, 115,000 notes were pulled, a mix of both genuine and fraudulent bills, because nobody could tell them apart. Imagine being a regular Portuguese citizen holding a 500 escudo note and being told it might be worthless. Trust in the currency collapsed. The escudo lost value. The already fragile economy spiraled deeper into chaos. Some of the fraudulent notes even earned a nickname. They were called notas camarão, which means shrimp notes, because Reis's team had soaked them in acid solutions to get rid of the smell of fresh ink. Even the small details of this scheme were absurdly calculated. Reis's wife, Maria Luisa Jacobetti de Azevedo, was arrested in August 1926 for jewelry bought with the fraudulent money. She was convicted and ordered to pay 5,000 contos. The scandal touched everyone connected to Reis. The trial didn't happen until May 1930, nearly 5 years after the arrest. Reis was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was released in May 1945, having served his full sentence. He lived the rest of his life in obscurity and died on July 9, 1955 in Lisbon at the age of 58. But here's what most people miss about this story. The Bank of Portugal sued Waterloo & Sons in British courts for printing the notes without proper verification. On April 28, 1932, the Bank of Portugal won damages of £610,392 from Waterloo & Sons. That case set a legal precedent about the responsibility of printing companies to verify the authority behind currency contracts. The political fallout was even bigger than the financial damage. The scandal deepened public distrust in both financial and political institutions. It helped weaken the already fragile First Republic. On May 28, 1926, a military coup overthrew the government and established what became the Ditadura Nacional. That regime eventually became the Estado Novo dictatorship under Antonio de Oliveira Salazar. Salazar was appointed finance minister on April 26, 1928, partly because the country was still reeling from financial instability. Within 1 year, he turned budget deficits into surpluses and stabilized the currency. A conman scheme didn't single-handedly cause a dictatorship, but it cracked the foundation that made one possible. A study from the London School of Economics, working paper number 82/04, titled Effects of the 1925 Portuguese Banknote Crisis, examined how the fraud amplified economic instability and eroded public trust in ways that went far beyond the money itself. The notes were worth about 1% of GDP, but the psychological damage to an already anxious population was far worse than any dollar amount. One common belief about this case is that Reis was just a clever forger. That misses the point entirely. He never forged a single banknote. He forged documents and trust. He exploited gaps in oversight between institutions in different countries. The printer in London had no direct line to the central bank in Lisbon. Nobody picked up the phone to double-check. That gap, that failure to verify, is what made the whole thing possible. Reis's story is still taught in financial fraud courses and economic history programs to this day. Not because it's ancient trivia, but because the lesson is uncomfortably relevant. Every currency system on Earth runs on trust. Trust that the notes in your pocket are backed by something real. Trust that someone is watching the printing press. When that trust breaks, even for a moment, the consequences can reshape an entire country's future. One man in his late 20s proved that nearly 100 years ago, and the world is still learning from it. If you made it this far, drop a comment with the wildest historical fact you know. I guarantee some of you have stories that deserve their own video.